Hello, my name is Rhys Morgan, and I work for Black Mountains Archaeology, or Archaeological, which is based in Gwent in South Wales. Firstly, thank you for inviting us to talk. It's always a privilege to share our work with wider audiences such as yourselves. This talk will cover the archaeological work that we've undertaken at the former site of the Hafod and Morfa Copperworks, which is situated along the River Towy in Swansea in South Wales. We've been working on the site for roughly, I think, about 8 years now. So far, we've undertaken a variety of different projects there. So this talk, because of this variety, this talk will only comprise a kind of summary of our work, or a sort of greatest hits, if you want, of archaeological discoveries. To provide a quick background to our involvement in the site's archaeology, Swansea has undergone and is currently undergoing significant redevelopment via Swansea's regeneration projects. And the Hafod and Morfa site, which you can see on the left here, occupies a major part of this redevelopment. The scheme is essentially bringing Swansea's lost heritage back to life, and we've been working closely with the council in this regard. This talk is divided into three main parts. Firstly, the history of Swansea's copperworks will be outlined, of which the Hafod and Morfa site forms only a part. Secondly, the archaeological discoveries that we've made at the Hafod and Morfa site will be summarised. And thirdly, some of the more interesting small finds that we've collected will be discussed. It's important to mention from the outset that our collection of small finds was quite limited due to, as you can imagine, due to contamination issues. This is, after all, a former major industrial site. So in other words, we didn't collect a huge number of small finds, and we had to be kind of really selective with the ones that we collected. But the small finds we did collect are very interesting and are able to kind of accentuate our view of the types of industrial or chemical processes that were going on at the copperworks. So this plan demonstrates the location and size of the Hafod and Morfa site as it survives today. As we can see, the site is divided into two parts. The first and oldest part is the Hafod site down here, situated in the south. The second part, which came slightly later, is up here. That's the Morfa site in the north. These two circles, the red and blue circles, only cover those parts of the site that have undergone archaeological investigation by us. And these represent the kind of surviving cores of the Hafod and Morfa sites. In its original form, the Hafod-Morfa Copperworks would have covered a much larger area, but unfortunately, these wider areas no longer survive as kind of visual elements in the landscape, or the cityscape, if you want. But as we can see on the plan, even the surviving cores of the Hafod and Morfa sites are largely by now devoid of visible industrial features. I mean, it's mostly car park and kind of, it's all just kind of abandoned. As we'll see later on, it's when we go below the surface that we start to find basically treasure troves of significant archaeological or significant industrial features. So both the Hafod and Morfa sites were established in the early 19th century, and by the early 20th century, they were amalgamated to form the Hafod-Morfa Copperworks. Although the area is characterized by heavy industrial activity, the names Hafod and Morfa hint at a kind of pre-industrial landscape that defined the area before the early 19th century. So the name Hafod, that means an upland grazing site, and Morfa is the opposite, it's a lowland grazing site. So we can therefore envisage the kinds of agricultural landscape that this place was before the Industrial Revolution and before large-scale industry took over. So on the screen now is a quick summary of the kinds of projects that we've undertaken across the Hafod and Morfa Copperworks. The photograph on the top left was taken during a combined strip map record, or SMR, and watching brief of the Morfa site in the north. The photo nicely captures the uncovering of a 20th century bathhouse The photo on the top right is taken during a field evaluation at the opposite end, the Hafod site. This was also a community project, and the excavation works were undertaken in large part anyway by volunteers. In the photo, you could just about see that the volunteers are wearing these kind of bright white disposable coveralls, and this basically gives the impression of the levels of contamination that define the site, especially when you start to go underground. The photo on the bottom right then, that was taken during another SMR at the Hafod site, where a very complicated assortment of archaeological features was uncovered. We've undertaken many more projects across the Hafod-Morfa site, but for want of time, I'll focus on mainly these three, particularly the SMR/watch and brief at the Morfa site. The photo on the left here, this is a photograph demonstrating the kinds of redevelopment that have taken place in Swansea and also the Hafod-Morfa Copperworks. What we can see here is basically the surviving core of the Morfa site. The photo captured the redevelopment of the site into a whiskey distillery owned by the Penderyn company, who are based nearby in the Rhondda. The photo was taken, I think, in 2022. By now, the redevelopment of the site is more or less complete. The photo on the right was taken during groundworks associated with the redevelopment of the Morfa site. And here we can see a machine driver in the process of uncovering some historic brickwork that was associated with the Morfa Copperworks. And it's important to mention the various stakeholders that were and still are involved in the archaeological work that we've undertaken. So the work was commissioned by Swansea Council, or Cyngor Abertawe, was funded at least partly by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Special thanks go to Swansea University, particularly Louise Miskell and Alex Langlands, who have undertaken huge amounts of research in support of Swansea's regeneration project. We're also thankful to the work of the Friends of the Hafod-Morfa Copperworks, again for undertaking research, but also for helping out with our community projects and for providing guided tours and I guess general education to the members of the public who are interested in the history and archaeology of the copperworking site. And on the right is a list of various awards that the regeneration project has either won or has been shortlisted for. So the lower Swansea Valley, where Swansea is situated, is also known as Copperopolis, and it covers the valley covers the present city of Swansea. Like I said, and during the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries, it was one of the most significant copper producing centres in the world. The valley was defined by multiple large-scale copperworking sites where smelting, casting, and rolling were taking place. As I'm sure you all know, smelting involves extracting metals from ore by heating them and melting them and separating the metal from the impurities. Casting involves shaping metals by pouring molten metal into a mold, and then when it cools and solidifies, it takes on a desired form. Rolling, this is a process of shaping metal by passing it through rotating rolls, a bit like pasta really, to reduce its thickness and produce flat kind of sheets or plates or whatever. And it takes on a specific profile then. The first copperworks to be established in the area was at Llangefellach in 1717. This is in the Landor area of Swansea, and Landor is basically in the immediate vicinity of what will later become the so-called Hafod-Morfa sites. Interestingly, this lower Swansea Valley contains no copper ore, and the reason that Copperopolis was established here was mainly because of the coal deposits that define much of the South Wales valleys. But copper ore was transported easily enough from Devon and Cornwall, where there's a lot of copper ore deposits. In the following decades, further smelting sites were established, including the White Rock Copperworks of 1736, which was, I think, about 10 years ago, excavated by Time Team. Also, the Upper Bank Copperworks of circa 1757, and the Penclouth Copperworks, which was founded prior to 1788, and many others. As we can see from the 1777 plan on the left, the Copperworks of Swansea was situated along the River Towy, which represented a kind of the main kind of transport route through the valley. And the 1815 plan on the right demonstrates the Hafod-Morfa area, which at this time was devoid of the Hafod or Morfa Copperworks, as they were yet to be built. So, as I've said, Copperopolis, this is a nickname for Swansea or the Lower Swansea Valley, and it reflects its 19th century status and 20th century status, actually, as a global centre of copper smelting and copper processing. 12 major copper working sites were established across the valley, but many more minor sites were also established. These are on the screen now are the 12 major copper working sites. As you can see, they're kind of spread out across the valley, across the edges of the valley, but the River Towy and Swansea comprise the heart, I suppose, of Copperopolis. In addition to the River Towy, the Copperworks of Swansea were attached to and fed by other canalised waterways. Swansea has a long history of canalising waterways that significantly predates the establishment of Copperopolis. For example, Humphrey Mackworth canalised the Mellan Crwthan Pill for some 300 yards, allowing access between his lead works and his copper works on the one hand, and seafaring ships and wharfage on the other hand. And beyond the smaller canalised waterways, two key artificial waterways existed in the Hafod-Morfa area. These are the Swansea Canal and the Smiths Canal, both opened in the 1790s. The Smiths Canal ran through the White Rock Copperworks to the east of the Hafod-Morfa area. Unlike the Swansea Canal, no Act of Parliament was required for the building of the Smiths Canal, as it didn't involve compulsory purchases or toll collection or anything like that. It went right through the White Rock Copperworks. Beyond the number and scale of copperworks that it contained, another important factor in allowing Copperopolis to succeed as an industrial centre of the world was the methods of smelting that developed here. In particular, the Lower Swansea Valley was defined by the so-called Welsh process. The Welsh process involved repeated roasting and melting of copper ores with coal or coke, which is like a refined version of coal, in a reverberatory furnace. And here's a reverberatory furnace, which allowed copper and fuel or coal to remain separate, meaning contamination was reduced. And when coal as a mineral fuel contaminates the metal, the quality of the metal degrades, basically. It's called a reverberatory furnace because the heat reverberates from the top. It kind of bounces off the top and down onto the metal. Elsewhere in Britain, furnaces were used that heated copper ore and fuel together, which increased contamination. Reverberatory furnaces like this one are found all over the Hafod and Morfa sites. These furnaces could be used for many, many different purposes beyond smelting. For example, it could be used for simple reheating processes like annealing. This makes perfect sense because if you have access to a furnace that can use coal or coke, you might as well use it because coal is plentiful in South Wales and Swansea. And now we'll move on to the history of the Hafod and Morfa Copperworks. The Hafod site, like I've said, is the earliest. It was founded in 1808 to 1809 by the Cornish entrepreneur John Vivian at Landor. The Cornish connection here is quite interesting, as, like I said, there's a lot of copper ore there, a lot of copper ore in across that part of Britain, and it also contained a lot of industrialists like Vivian who knew how to smelt it. Throughout most of the 19th century, the Hafod Copperworks was likely the largest copperworks in the world and represented a kind of beating heart of Copperopolis when it was opened. The development of the site during the 19th century has been summarised by Stephen Hughes, and on the right is a speculative plan by Hughes from his 2000 publication known simply as Copperopolis. The site initially comprised a smelting hall, to which a rolling mill was added. This is known as the #1 rolling mill. And an additional smelting halls were built, and a hammer house was then built. And this all happens throughout the early 19th century. By 1842, a second rolling mill was constructed. This is known aptly as the #2 rolling mill. This was built within the vicinity of the #1 rolling mill. Both mills were later powered by a Neath Abbey steam engine situated within an engine house constructed in 1860 to 1862, which is known as the Vivian Engine House, which today comprises a listed building. So basically, in summary, there was a range of different processes going on at the Hafod site. The Morfa Copperworks was established after the Hafod Copperworks in an area immediately to the north. The Morfa Works was founded by the firm Grenfell, Williams and Fox, which later became Williams, Foster and Co., the leading partner of which was the Cornish entrepreneur Michael Williams, another guy from Cornwall. It was established in 1828, at which time it was devoted solely to the rolling of copper ingots into bars and plates. Initially, the works comprised a single elongated building, which is known as the Morfa Rolling Mill, as you can see on the screen here, which may have been the largest structure of its kind in the world and potentially employed up to 1,000 workers. It was only in 1834 to 35 that smelting operations began on site, with the erection of the so-called Morfa New Works, situated to the south of this rolling mill. This included a smelting hall, furnace houses, and an engine house. By 1888, a large cast house had been constructed at the Morfa site. This was known as the Yellow Metal Mill. And in this mill, Muntz metal, or also known as yellow metal, was manufactured and cast. Yellow metal basically comprises a copper zinc alloy, and it was used as an inexpensive sheathing for naval vessels, which prevented the buildup of barnacles on the vessel. The yellow metal process was patented in 1832, and the Morfa site was a prime location for yellow metal manufacture. Despite being situated adjacent to one another, the Hafod and Morfa Copperworks were, until the early 20th century, distinct enterprises. The boundary between the two copperworks was marked by a long wall, aligned east-west, or approximately east-west. That's this here. Legend has it that the employees of both copperworks were ordered to avoid communicating with their neighbours out of fear that trade secrets would be inadvertently revealed. As well as being older, the Hafod site, as we can see, was the larger of the two copperworks. So to recap, here are the most significant structures that defined the two copperworks in the 19th century. And as you can see, this is the yellow metal mill here. In 1928, the two sites were then amalgamated to form the Hafod-Morfa Copperworks. During this time, the strict boundary that previously separated the works was dismantled. Following the amalgamation, all plate manufacture was transferred to the Hafod site, as the Morfa site lacked the machinery to sufficiently roll locomotive plates, which by the early 20th century were characteristically very thick. And from the 1960s onwards, global copper refining was increasingly shifted to uh, the the major ore producing countries. So, for example, Chile, Zambia, Canada, Australia, and so on. This is part of a vertical integration of multinational mining companies. Because of this, Britain's secondary refining capacity was no longer competitive. From the 1970s, large parts of the Morfa site were demolished. By 1980, the Hafod site was finally put out of use, marking the end of not only the Hafod-Morfa Copperworks, but Copperopolis as a whole. So the Hafod-Morfa site was the last remnant of this significant industry. The early 1980s, of course, coincided, and the late 70s, with the prime ministership of Margaret Thatcher. And although the industrial decline of Britain and Europe wasn't necessarily caused by Thatcher's government, it's basically impossible to talk about deindustrialization in Britain, at least, without mentioning the name Margaret Thatcher. So the next few slides will summarize the archaeological discoveries and phasing of the Morfa Copperworks. So we've outlined three very, very broad phases. The first phase is the early to mid 19th century. Phase 2 is the late 19th century, and phase 3 is the early to mid 20th century. So begin with phase 1. So towards the north end of the Morfa site, we excavated along the east edge of the former Morfa rolling mill. Almost immediately below the tarmac, we found a brick-built floor. As you can see on the 1840s tithe map on the left, the rolling mill originally incorporated this kind of southeast annex, which no longer survives today. The floor would have been positioned within the interior of the annex. It's not known what kind of operations were happening in the annex, but as you'd imagine, they were almost certainly associated with rolling. So possibly this is a place where intermediary annealing was taking place in between rolling operations, or perhaps the final shaping of sheets and plates and things like that. And running underneath the floor of the annex, towards and under the Morfa rolling mill, was a large hot gas flue. The hot gas flue, basically, as you can see, it comprised a two side walls with an arch over the top made out of tapered bricks or voussoirs. As you can see, this is me sticking a camera down there. I mean, God knows where this goes. I didn't particularly want to find out. I mean, it goes towards the Morfa rolling mill, but beyond that, we have no idea. It would have vented into one of the various chimneys that define the Hafod-Morfa site, and this gives an impression of the amount of potential voids that define the site. You can almost imagine the site like a kind of Swiss cheese, just holes absolutely everywhere. Also constructed during the early 19th century was a large industrial pond. The pond was infilled prior to the erection of the Morfa canteen towards the end of the 19th century. That's this building here. And there's the remnants of the pond here. We can see the pond on the 1880s Ordnance Survey map in the top left. The pond was noticed by the presence of large amounts of waterlogged clay, which infilled the pond. It seems that the pond supplied water. It supplied water to the Morfa Copperworks from various different processes. The water was possibly pumped into a tank which was situated in the pond. The water possibly came from the Swansea Canal, and it was perhaps discharged into the River Towy. Immediately west of the pond, a wharf connected to the Swansea Canal was built. That's this here. The wharf allowed raw materials to be dropped down into the copperworks from the canal, which is situated on an upper terrace. A large retaining wall, as you can see on the photo on the right, define both the east edge of the wharf and the west edge of the pond. And as we can see, it's absolutely enormous. So now we'll move on to phase 2 of the Morfa site, which comprised those features or structures incorporated into the works during the late 19th century. Firstly, we'll return to the annex attached to the Morfa rolling mill. To kind of reiterate, we found early flooring in the annex, which was likely contemporary with the construction of the rolling mill in 1828. During the late 19th century, or by at least the 1890s, the annex was, and potentially the whole rolling mill in its entirety, was refurbished with new furnaces and other industrial features. The construction of these features involved the partial demolition of the flooring deposits associated with the annex in its original form. So, yeah, we saw kind of saw a clear stratigraphic sequence there. In the main, the features comprised reverberatory furnaces, like the one on the right. As you can see in this photo, your kind of standard reverberatory furnace was made up of a variety of different bricks. This is because you can imagine as the furnace is getting heated, the bricks are kind of shaking, they're kind of popping out, they're kind of warping. So you kind of imagine that the furnace was almost continually rebuilt as it was being used, and also wrought like iron straps had to go around the outside, literally to keep the structure of the furnace in place as it was being heated. So this is very much a volatile feature. And during the late 19th century, many additional hot gas flues were incorporated into the site. This reflects the additional plant that was constructed across the site, and it also reflects increased capacity. So more furnaces, more rolling mills, more cast houses, etc. And this means more hot gas being produced, and it means that this hot gas needs to be discharged into the atmosphere. And here are two examples of these additional hot gas flues. One of the more interesting discoveries belonging to phase 2 was the west side of the yellow metal mill. To reiterate, the mill was built in 1888 to produce and cast yellow metal. And like as I also said, the Morfa site was one of the most important centres of yellow metal production in Britain. And here we can see the interior of the mill's west edge, which contained a bank of furnaces. That's the photo on the left. And again, these are all reverberatory furnaces. This is only a small part of the yellow metal mill. This is, like I said, the west end or the west edge. The mill would have extended significantly this way to the east, and is now underneath the Landor Park and Ride car park. And now we move on to the Morfa canteen. The exact date of that this was built isn't precisely known, although it is shown on the 1880s first edition OS map. This is a classic example of Victorian utilitarian or civic architecture. It has it's been elaborated with arched window heads and has or had an ornate clock tower at the top, which has now been reconstructed by the Penderyn company. The building, as we can appreciate here, was literally falling apart at the start of our investigations. The roof, this is the roof level here, was badly damaged in a fire, and the interior was basically, you can see here, unrecognizable as a canteen. These photos are from the 20th century, but the building remains remarkably consistent in appearance and use from the 19th century when it was built. Various functions would have been held here, particularly at annual holidays, thanks to the stage here in the rear. These functions would have, included music, performances like comedy and things like that, things just to keep the workers' morale up. And this kind of leads us quite nicely onto phase three, which covers the 20th century. The 20th century, particularly the early 20th century, witnessed a burst of new building activity. Unfortunately, this died down following World War II. One of the key elements of this phase was the mortar. So the mortar from the 1900s, 1910s, the Edwardian mortar. This was a black, ashy lime mortar, and as a lime mortar, it was very kind of soft. By the 1920s, we start to see this grey Portland cement, which is a characteristically, as you know, very, very compact, very strong. So here's the bathhouse that I mentioned at the start of the talk. This was built in the 1920s. Following World War One, large numbers of amenities like bathhouses were built across industrial sites in Britain. These mainly appear, particularly in South Wales, in coal mines, but bathhouses like this can be seen, in Copperworks as well. And this particular bathhouse can obviously belong to that tradition of incorporating new amenities into industrial sites, making the workers' lives that little bit more bearable. And as we move into the mid-20th century, we can see poignant reminders of World War II and its impact on key industrial sites like the Hafod-Morfa Copperworks. Due to its importance to the British economy and because it was linked to, munitions production, the site was a target for Luftwaffe bombing raids. The photos on the left, these are of a World War II bunker. The bunker basically comprised it was just quite depressing looking box, really, made out of shuttered concrete. This was built directly into the yellow metal mill. For reference, the bank of reverberation furnaces that I talked about before, they run along here. So a floor was built directly over the furnaces, and then the bunker was punched directly through the west wall of the yellow metal mill. The photos on the right are of a World War II memorial, or World War II memorial garden, to be more specific. This was dedicated to the servicemen and civilians from the Hafod-Morfa site that died. So 15 bombs hit Hafod, or the Hafod-Morfa site, in 1941 on March the 12th, causing 3 deaths and 9 casualties. Swansea, as a whole, as a key port and industrial centre, was extensively bombed during World War II. And whenever anybody does ground penetrating work across Swansea, a bomb specialist is often required. So now we move towards the south end of the Hafod-Morfa Copperworks to discuss the archaeology of the Hafod site. So as I previously said, we undertook an SMR and a field evaluation at the Hafod site. So the so-called number 1 rolling mill represents at least one of the older structures on the site. This produced copper sheets, plates, and also strips. The rolling mill was situated right up towards the banks of the River Towy, so we had immediate access to the river as a transport corridor. And here's a plan of the rolling mill dated to 1818. So we have the rolls in the center here. These are all different sizes, which reflect the kind of forms of copper that they produced. The plan shows a kind of broad sequence of operations going roughly from right to left. So on the right, we have the so-called breakdown rolls. These were used for the initial heavy reduction of copper, and then the finishing rolls here. These are presumably used for smaller sized sheets and plates. Then we have the large finishing rolls, larger size sort of sheets and plates. And then the bolt rolls, as you can see, was used for sort of narrower strips of copper. It seems that all copper was rolled to size in the breakdown rolls before being transferred to one of the other 3 to achieve a desired shape form. Each roll or rolls was then associated with a specific furnace, as we can see along here. These were used to anneal the copper, soften it, basically, before and after rolling. And sandwiched in between the furnaces is an engine house, and connecting the engine to the rolls is this rope or belt drive here in the middle. By the 1860s, the number 1 rolling mill was accompanied by the number 2 rolling mill. The new number 2 mill had its own steam engine, which housed in the Vivian engine house, which still stands today as a listed building. The engine inside had a 24-inch cylinder and had a 3-foot stroke. So this means that the pistons would have risen and fallen 3 feet each cycle. The 24-inch cylinder, for its time anyway, was massive. This may have produced over a ton of force per stroke of between 100 and 200 horsepower. Might not sound like a lot today, but for the time that was very powerful. The steam engine was supplied by the Neath Abbey Iron Works, which represented an internationally significant producer of steam engines. These engines were shipped all over the world and were installed in many of Britain's most important steamships. And by 1910, both the numbers 1 and 2 rolling mills had been demolished, and these were replaced by the so-called Hafod rolling mill. The mill measured approximately 110 meters long, so it was therefore very much a dominating structure in the industrial landscape of Swansea. And again, it ran right along the banks of the River Towy, as you can see in the aerial photo here. This was powered by, again, its very own steam engine, which is known as the Musgrave Uniflow engine. The engine house still survives today. It's again a listed building, and the curtilage immediately around it is also a scheduled monument. As you can see, the Vivian wasn't demolished at this time, along with the numbers 1 and 2 rolling mills. It was, at least by the 1940s, it was converted to a compressor house, so it was stripped of all this kind of previous plant and provided compressed air for various machinery on site. Within the Musgrave engine house was the Musgrave Uniflow steam engine. The engine was basically a kind of transitional technology that bridged traditional steam engines of the 19th century to more modern turbines of the early 20th century. These engines were developed from 1907 onwards. The Hafod rolling mill therefore housed the pinnacle of steam technology in Britain. Steam entered at the cylinder ends, here, and exhausted through a port in the center. So this basically means that steam flowed in one direction only, and the result was a simpler and more thermally efficient engine, especially at kind of steady loads. It's so efficient it was still being used in 1980, believe it or not. But the mill also contained many electrical components. So, for example, there were live rolling tables, which were powered by electricity, and these were responsible for transporting copper from the furnace to the rolls and back to the furnace. And this was very much a time when the use of electricity in industrial processes was beginning to take off. It was only a decade previously, in 1900, that the Swansea Corporation built the first power station in Swansea, whilst during the same year, the street tramways of Swansea began to be converted from horsepower to electricity. And on the left is some of the rolls that survive today. They're now out in the open, as obviously the rolling mill has been demolished. But these were thankfully preserved, and these are now situated within the curtilage of a scheduled monument. And then we have the rope drive here, which connected the Musgrave engine to the rolls. And on the right, then this photograph gives you an impression of what the rolls would have looked like in operation. And these rolls here are the same ones in the left, and you can see the rope drive there. And we've recently undertaken excavations or further excavations at the Hafod site. They're still ongoing, actually. And during these excavations, we've unearthed a nice sort of stratigraphic sequence where we've got the later 1910 rolling mill overlying remnants of the older rolling mills, particularly the #1 rolling mill. So on the left here, we've got a furnace associated with the #1 rolling mill, and on the right then we've got a very, very large hot gas flue. So now we'll move on to a brief discussion of the small finds that we've collected. So we'll start off with the so-called technical ceramics. These are found all over the place on the Morfa site. These were analysed by Tim Young, again, of GeoArc and Cardiff University. So for clarity, a technical ceramic can be defined as a piece of ceramic equipment that was used in any kind of technical process or chemical process that was going on at the copperworks. The technical ceramics found on site were related to a process known as fire assaying. So fire assaying comprises a set of techniques for determining the precious metal, i.e. gold, silver, content of mainly ores, but sometimes from so-called mats, which are kind of intermediary products between smelting and kind of final reduction. This is important as it could determine the value of the imported ores and therefore the potential profit from the ores. Also, it was important for metallurgical control, as you can imagine. The first stage of fire assaying was known as fusion, where the ore was mixed with a litharge, which comprised a lead oxide, and another reducing agent in a what's called a crucible. Alternatively, fusion could be undertaken via a similar process known as scorification. And this is where the ore is mixed with lead in a so-called scorifer. The fusion permitted the uptake of the precious metal, or the silver and gold, into the lead. And the product of this fusion stage was known as a lead bead, or a little lump of lead. This then undergoes a process known as cupellation, which used a cupel, another type of technical ceramic, where the precious metal was separated from the lead via oxidation in bone ash. And the thing that separates a cupel from any other type of technical ceramic is that there's bone ash already in the fabric. So this aided with this oxidation process. So on the screen here, we've got the various scorifers that we found across the site. These are by far the most common technical ceramic, identified again by Tim Young. Many came from the Battersea Works in London, which were made by the Morgan Crucible Company. Cupels were much rarer. Tim only identified 3 probable examples, but here's one. As you can see, it's very well used. Looks very, very similar to a scorifer, but again, the main difference, and it is a very significant difference, is that the fabric had bone ash in it. And here are the crucibles, which again belong to the fusion stage of the fire assaying process. These are, as you can see, much larger, kind of, I suppose, mug-sized technical ceramics. And then we'll move on to the foundry patterns that were discovered. These were all discovered in the basement of the Morfa canteen. Many different types of timber objects were found here, but 39 foundry patterns were recorded and collected. So a foundry pattern is an accurate physical model of an object that is intended to be cast in metal, obviously in this case copper alloy. They're used by molders to create metal replicas of the pattern. So in terms of how they you transform one of these into a metal object. A sand mold is packed around the pattern. The pattern is then removed to leave a cavity. Molten metal is then poured into the mold. The mold is then broken to reveal the casting, and then excess metal, excess kind of burrs are then removed or filed away. These patterns were reused repeatedly for multiple castings of the same components. So we're talking machine parts, fittings, pipes, valves, bearings, gears, furnace fittings, and so on and so on. The foundry patterns found in the basement of the Morfa canteen were likely used, at least in part, in the cast house that was situated on the south side of the Morfa yellow metal mill. So on the top left, we've got a pattern for a pipe elbow, possibly from a steam engine. Bottom left, this is a loose flange pipe. It's basically comprised of detachable joint components, allowing sections of pipe to be bolted together or disconnected again whenever necessary. Top center, then we've got a mill roll blank. It's comprised there. This would have been turned into a roll that was sent to one of the rolling mills. And this here we can appreciate that when an object is cast of this particular shape, it has to be cast in two sections and then then it has to be put together. That's just the nature of how casting worked. So after casting, the blank was only roughly formed. So before being installed in the rolling mill or in the rolling mill proper, the roll would have been ground to a desired finish. And then top right, this is a pattern for a steam engine bearing cap. Bearing is a machine component that supports moving parts, usually like rotating shafts and things like that, and allows them to move smoothly with minimal friction and wear. So this formed the kind of rigid cradle around the upper portion of the bearing, and this was detachable, which allows the bearing to be inspected and repaired, and this is why it was cast. And a foundry pattern was manufactured by a skilled pattern maker working from an engineering drawing, who measured all the dimensions using special rulers that deliberately enlarged the model to allow for metal shrinkage during casting, during cooling more specifically, and later machining as well. The pattern was then built by carpenters and also involved joinery, turning, and carving techniques, with separate pieces added where complex shapes or removable sections were needed to form cores or undercuts, after which all surfaces were carefully smoothed, sealed, often painted for color coding to indicate machining areas, parting lines, core locations. These are often individually numbered for cataloging, and finally then they were delivered to the foundry molders as a kind of master model from which many different castings could be made. And unfortunately, these photographs aren't from the Hafod and Morfa site themselves, but they give a nice impression of of what pattern making kind of looked like. If we see on the left, this guy's very proud of his recent pattern here, and this is I guess a typical workshop where patterns were manufactured. Thank you.